One of the quickest ways to spot a false convert or someone who's fallen away from the faith completely is by their mouth. Now, I'm going to prove this to you by using the words of Paul. I'm going to prove this to you by using the words of Jesus. And if all else fails, I'm going to resort to pure logic and good old-fashioned common sense. And be sure to stick around towards the end because I'm going to give my personal testimony as well as a testimony of other saints. Ephesians 5:3-11 says, "Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place." Okay, so what is filthiness? What is foolish talk? What is crude joking? Okay, obviously filthiness is anything that is unclean. Foolish talk is anything that is just silly. And crude joking is anything with like sexual innuendo or anything like that. It says that these are out of place. And then he goes on to say that this person, anyone who practices these things, for you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. And then he goes on to say that this is even more clear. He goes on to say, "Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience." Okay, why would he need to put, "Let no one deceive you with empty words"? The reason is because people just like today are constantly out there trying to deceive you. Don't let anybody deceive you, for because of these things, well, what are these things? He goes through them right here. He says, "Let there be no filthiness, nor even foolish talk, nor even crude joking, for these are out of place. For this person has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words." People are full of empty words today. Oh, it's not that big of a deal, or oh, that's legalistic, or this or that. But guys, Paul is warning you right here. Let no one deceive you with empty words. Like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It actually is a big deal because Paul goes on to say, "For because of these things." Well, what's these things that he's talking about? All this up here, okay? Because he says, "Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking." And then he goes on to say, "For," see, that's a continuation of this. He says, "For you may be sure of this." So he's saying, because of this, you may be sure of this, that everyone who's sexually immoral or impure, who's unclean, who does unclean things. See, the filthiness. "For because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience." Guys, there's so many deceivers out there that are trying to deceive people with empty words. Don't fall for them. Don't fall for them. Okay, now let's look at what he says in Colossians. It's pretty much the same thing. "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality," and again he says the same thing, "impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, all these, the wrath of God is coming." He's saying again, the wrath of God is coming. And then get this, he says, "In these you too once walked when you were living in them." This implies if you once walked in them, it implies that now you don't. Because he says, "But now you must put them all away." And what do you have to put away? Well, he goes on to say, anger, wrath, malice, slander. But it's not just these. It's not just these things right here. He even goes so far as to say, obscene talk from your mouth. Now I've heard people say, well, see, he's right here. He's just talking about, cussing at people in a mean way, like if you're putting them down or degrading them or calling them names. And that's all this is talking about. Okay, well, let's just look at this. Well, let's just look at what the Greek says, because that's not true. That's not what the Greek says. Obscene talk from your mouth. I looked at obscene, and it's this word right here. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. But it means, in the Greek, it means any foul speaking, low and obscene speech. This does not apply just to cussing at somebody out of anger or wrath or anything like that. This goes so far as to say anything that's foul, anything that's obscene. Now, guys, just let me ask you this for 1 second. People say, okay, well, back in the 2,000 years ago, they didn't have the D word, or the S word, or any of the other 4-letter words in English that we have. So is that really obscene? I mean, this to me is just silly, because we clearly know what obscene is. Obscene is something that, is just foul, that it kind of makes people take a step back. Now, how in the world are you going to convince somebody that dropping the F-bomb, it doesn't matter what way it's used, even if it's used in the nicest way possible, how that would not be considered to be obscene? I mean, if you don't think it's obscene, then try using it next time you greet your grandmother. Say, "What's up, blankety blank?" I mean, this is just ridiculous to say that obscene would not qualify for any of the 4-letter words that we know today. Anything that's obscene. And again, he says, on account of these, the wrath of God is coming. See, a lot of people say it's not that big of a deal, but again, they're trying to deceive you. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. He goes on to say, in these you too once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them away. Well, them is referring to back here, these. Okay, he just goes on to say, this is all just a continual thought, all the way down to obscene talk. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. Okay, now if this still doesn't convince you, let's move on to the words of Jesus. Jesus takes it up even a step further. He takes it to the nth degree here, okay? And he basically says, and this is what I get a lot, is this really that big of a deal? And, it's just cussing, it's just words. Well, but Jesus says that it's actually much more than that, because he says whatever comes out of your mouth is actually just what's in your heart. It comes from an evil heart. So evil words and curse words are just displaying what's already in your heart. It's not that they're in and of themselves bad. It's that they're simply revealing what's already in your heart. And I know you're going to say, wow, how can you say that I have an evil heart? Just because I use a few cuss words? No, I wouldn't say that. But Jesus will. Listen, he says, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Whatever's coming out of your mouth is simply what's deep down in your heart. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good. And the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. And then he takes it up even a step further, okay? If you guys are still not convinced, let's just keep reading. He says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. Okay, guys, there's no way that you could get around this. There's no way. So even if you've somehow been able to justify it so far, you're still going to have to give an account for every careless word. We would have to, at the very least, say that the F-bomb is a careless word. Okay, at the very least. And he says, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. He's simply repeating the same exact thing that Paul said in Colossians and Ephesians, that on account of your wicked words, your obscene speech, the wrath of God is coming. Let no one deceive you. And guys, if you're still not convinced, I'm going to plead to you just on the basis of sheer logic, okay? And just sheer common sense. If you say that cussing is truly not a sin, and there's nothing wrong with it as long as you don't, use it in a bad way to hurt somebody or tear somebody down, then try this, okay? Let's just try this next time. If you sincerely believe that with all of your heart, I want you to try this. Next time you're in your prayer closet, praying to God, the holy God of the universe, I want you to try slipping in an F-bomb. I want you to try slipping in some other 4-letter word and see how that goes for you. Anybody who tries to deceive you with this is not going by the Bible. They're not carefully studying the Word. They're not using common sense. And they most likely have not been filled with the Spirit of God. Guys, the Spirit of God is holy. That's why He's called the Holy Spirit. There's no way that you could convince a normal person that using the F-bomb, no matter what context, or any kind of crude joking, sexual innuendo, anything like that, would be considered to be holy. So my question would be, just based on pure logic, is how in the world can you claim to have the Holy Spirit living in you and you using unholy words? When I met Jesus almost 10 years ago to this day, I was radically born again. I mean, the Spirit of God entered me. He started working in my life, removing things that didn't need to be there, almost like pulling weeds. It was just one thing after the other. And one of the first things He dealt with me on was my mouth, among other things, but one of the first things was my mouth. And this is the same exact testimony that I hear countless times of people being born again. One of the first things that God deals with them about is their mouth. Now, guys, if you haven't had this experience where the Holy Spirit has come into you and convicted you of your mouth, then my friend, you have not been born again, because there's no possible way that you can claim to know God and have the Holy Spirit living in you and the Holy Spirit allow you to just spew filth out of your mouth. It just doesn't happen. And it's not just me that says that. It's the Bible, and it's also the testimony of saints everywhere. I mean, I can't tell you how many testimonies that I've heard where this is one of the first things that God deals with them on. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, well, but my friends and everybody around me, curses. Well, do we bend the word? Do we bend other people? What do we do with other people's testimonies where the Holy Spirit was convicting them and convincing them to change and give up their filthy talk right away? If this doesn't picture you and describe you, then you seriously need to reevaluate your life and reevaluate whether or not you've truly been born again or if you're just deceiving yourself. So if you found this video helpful, please subscribe. And as always, stay faithful.